I had. Hello and welcome to the show. This week, I'm thrilled to be welcomed by thrilled to be joined rather by Stephanie Fateni. Now, if you're watching, this is the second attempt at going live. Stephanie had been happily chatting to me for a few minutes, thinking I'd gone live, but I'd forgotten to click the button. So if you've been waiting, I'm very sorry. So if you're watching, I'm thrilled you're here. Really, really glad. If you haven't met me before, my name is Bob Gentle, and I run Amplify, the Amplify Digital Marketing Entrepreneur podcast, the agency, and I work with business owners to help them discover, set, and achieve their goals online. Again, this week, I'm joined by Stephanie Fateni. Stephanie, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Sure. I'm Stephanie Fateni from Malta, and I'm a content marketing coach and strategist. So I help other coaches, mostly coaches and consultants, who want to grow their business online through content and SEO and blogging. So of course, because for coaches and anyone who needs to be seen as an expert in their business and in their industry, they really need to, blog and create, of course, a lot of wonderful content and put it all out there. So that's what all I'm about, potentially with special emphasis on SEO, because that's one of the things that I love to get really deep into because of my background in tech and programming. So that's all what I'm all about.
So thank you. And again, sorry for making you say all that twice. That's so embarrassing.
That's really okay.
So I put out a YouTube video, I think it was Wednesday today. So yeah, yesterday. And it was about search engine marketing for local businesses. And it was really focusing on Google My Business. And then we were looking at things that you can do on your website to improve your search engine performance. But then the third element was content. And content, I think for a lot of business owners, it feels like a lot of work. And I know from an agency perspective that if I was ever hired to speak about digital marketing with a client and I told them, you're going to need to write content once a week for the next year, they were going to fire me and they were going to hire someone else. So I guess when people come to you, a lot of the time you're really focusing on content. How do you bridge that gap where you're telling them you're going to have to do something that's probably painful for a long, long time before you're going to see a result?
Okay, that's interesting. Actually, a lot of the people that approach me have already done something more painful than writing weekly content, which is writing weekly content and getting nowhere. So yeah, I think it's we're all creating content, and I think in terms of my audience, usually they have been blogging already, but it's so demotivating when you don't see any feedback or any ranking or any traffic. It's a lot of work. So that's where we come in.
So most companies have a blog on their website, and it's not really used. They might post a press release to it once every 3 or 4 months. If I made notes of a few different sort of sectors that you could probably point your finger at and say this is normal. So if we maybe start with a printer, a little local printing company, and I know this isn't your niche, but nobody's judging us on this. How might the average little printing company use its blog effectively? And I know that's a very vague question, but if I was a printer and I came to you and said, this is what I do, how should I use my blog?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, no, it's not completely out of scope. I've actually worked with a lot of B2B companies, a lot of tech companies. In the agency, I used to have an agency before, which was full service. So I have worked with a lot of different industries. And actually, a printer is kind of B2C and B2B as well. So it actually has a lot of potential to get leads from the blog. One of the mistakes I see a lot of companies that start blogging do is to focus on talking about themselves. Like you said, they post press releases, they talk about how great they are, how they write about their services and their products. And in reality, we hear a lot about the fact that your client should be the hero, and it's very much the same thing with blogging. Nobody is going to read about how great you are because you won this award. Yeah, they might read the first 2 lines. Now they know that's it. They're going to drop it. But if you're going to retain people on your blog, and that's very important to actually get ranked and actually get traffic and visibility, then you want to create content that people are going to find really useful. And, it's very hard. It's harder for businesses actually than it is for individuals like coaches. But what tends to happen is that they find it really hard to forget what they're selling and really serve their audience. And blogs, that's what they're really about. So it's a bit of a balance. You need to make sure that you're really helping your client with the content. It needs to have educational value. It needs to have something that they're going to take away from and come back for. But also, it needs to sort of not be so broad that then they don't understand what you do. So it's a little bit of a balance. You have to open to serve as much as possible, but you cannot sort of open so much that then people are confused as to what you're selling and what you do. So it's a bit,
So being specific then, when that printer is sitting in there with a blank page, what should drive their decisions as to what they decide to write about?
Okay, so let's go through a few questions. So the first thing I would ask them is, who is your best client? What kind of client is your best client? And, what will they buy from you? Because before you set the goals for your blog, you need to know exactly what you're going to sell and who you're going to sell it to. So like any other form of marketing, these 2 things are very important, but especially when you're going to be focusing on that goal in the long term, it's even more important because you need to really keep that focus. So let's take a printer as an example. Let's say their biggest client, let's say they like to go directly to their clients. So they're selling to companies and they go through their books. I always ask my clients to do that. Go through your books and also take note of what is most profitable and also what takes the least time to actually monetize, because some companies have very large products. They can charge 100K for something, but it takes a company a very long time to actually get that money back in. So sometimes that's maybe not the smartest thing to start working on. So, okay, so once you've decided the kind of clients, let's say, for instance, they find that companies that have hit the 10-year anniversary are a fantastic target audience because they usually need to redo their brand. Some of them have, like to add a special anniversary logo for that particular year. They maybe might throw some sort of party or organize some sort of conference for their clients. So they are going to need a lot of new collaterals. They might need, printing of banners and all sorts of things that go with a 10-year anniversary. So that might turn into a big order. So they say, okay, we're going to focus on these. So then it's just a matter of stepping back and saying, okay, so who are the companies that we would target in our local area or within, the catchment area where you work, and get a good idea of who are the clients that you already have and the ones that you want, they're really the ones that would be a dream to have. And you kind of create a profile of what that company needs, not only in terms of printing, but in terms of, in this case, for instance, you could focus specifically around the topic of 10-year anniversaries. So what does a company that has just turned 10 years need? And again, like I mentioned before, I think then you also need to focus on sort of what topics make sense. So you might go as far as talking about, they might be looking for information about restructuring their team or having complex organigrams. As a printer, you don't want to go that far because it becomes a bit unclear what you're going to do. But you may want to, for instance, talk about conferences. So how do they organize a conference? How to maybe make your conference more cost effective? Potentially, if it's trendy at this particular time, video is very much in news. Maybe you might have an article as to how to combine video with the print format, and latest technology. So take it from that point of view. In a way, what I find is that the most effective blogging is when you go into a lot of niche subjects within the context of the people you're trying to target. And when shared on social media, this can have a very, very fast effect because you will attract the right people right away. And this is also how you need to think, is someone who's reading this article going to want to contact me in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, in the next 4 weeks? Because yes, it's content that's going to rank and get you leads in the long term. But if it wouldn't get you leads now, then it's probably the wrong topic to pick.
I really like that because a lot of people talk about blog content from a long-term perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And in many respects, you can just write a page of keyword-rich garbage and it'll probably help you in the long term. But when somebody actually comes to read that, they're not going to convert because your post was garbage. But taking your approach and really investing into that conversion-orientated content, really telling a compelling story that's really likely to convert. It supports both short and long term. So it's really neat. It sounds obvious.
Yes, it sounds obvious, and that's right. And that's why one of the first questions I would ask is, what are you trying to sell? Because the first thing you need to decide is, what are your call to actions going to be? So you have call to actions where maybe the client is not close enough to the 10-year anniversary to take action now, but you want them to keep coming back and read more articles, or maybe jump on your email list. Maybe you can give them something for free. Maybe you can give an event planner that they can just print and use, or something like that. And then you have the content where they might use it right away, or they might just put it away and use it in the next few weeks. So you want to make sure that you're kind of useful right now in their day-to-day. And then, of course, you have the content that targets people who are ready to buy now. And those are the people who should really, when they see the blog post, click that link and book a call with you. And this really, really actually works in the short term. When I put these blog posts out, actually, I usually see a spike in my discovery calls booked through my website. Of course, I'm doing that for the long term because I know that once they rank, the call to action is going to bring in much more discovery calls. But yes, it definitely also has the short term in mind.
Then another supplementary question, and obviously I have my own perspective on this, but this is your specific area. Once you've written a blog post, for some people that's the job done.
Mm-hmm.
But really, that's where the job should just be beginning. So what kind of framework do you have once you've written a blog post? What comes next?
Okay, so once I've written a blog post, so first and foremost, before I've written it, I already have the keyword. So the first thing that happens is the keyword research. We identify the keywords that we're going to use, and those then get turned into titles. Then we go into the writing. Again, the writing, although you know the keyword before, it does not mean you write with the keywords. I don't think you can write a good article when you're thinking about a keyword. I don't think that's possible. And so what you would do is you just focus on writing a good article, that putting in value and the right call to action and everything. And then once that is finished, then like you said, I would go in and put in the keywords. So Yeah, well, it's a little bit difficult to explain, but sort of to give you a bit of a summary, the keywords need to put in a way that is natural. So if you're using a two-word keyword, let's say we're using digital marketing, it would be natural, for instance, to use it towards the beginning of the article and maybe in some of your bullet lists, but it's not very natural for you to use it towards the end of the article. Because, if you're having a conversation with someone, say, we're talking, you'd first start talking about digital marketing, and then later in the conversation, you start calling it just marketing, or, or you talk about digital tools. So it's actually not very natural to keep repeating the same keyword over and over. So you really need to be careful not to overuse. The second step would be to have, of course, the internal links and the external links. So important to look up some articles on your own website that are connected, and then linking to those particular articles. Being especially careful to not link to articles that actually have the same or a very similar keyword to the one of the article you're writing, because that can become a little bit confusing for search engines especially. And then, of course, it's usually easy to link out to other sites, especially when we're dealing with SEO or digital marketing. We mentioned tools and we mentioned things to do. You just, link out to those sites. And then, of course, adding images. Adding images is an important one as well. Not so much the kind of tags you put in it, although the tags are important because they can rank in Google Images. But most people wouldn't go to a blog post through Google Images. So, but the number of images that you have is actually going to be a bit of an indicator of the quality as well. And from my experience as well, blog posts that have more images actually tend to get more comments.
Right.
Which is quite an interesting one.
What's interesting to me is the answer that you gave wasn't the answer I was expecting. What I spoke about when I said, what should you do once the blog post is written? I was actually thinking in terms of distribution. But what you answered was actually much more important.
Okay.
But can you maybe explain the benefit of internal linking? I think everybody will be quite accustomed to you need links coming into your website. But why is linking from one page or one post on your website to another important?
Well, it's important because Google does not automatically just find all the pages on your blog, and it does not automatically find all the pages in your website. So the more you interlink, the more you have, the more windows you have into sort of all the pages of your site. Now, of course, you can get all your pages indexed by submitting your sitemap to Google Console, or having a sitemap on your website, which is actually a very old-fashioned thing to have these days. But these links, they just help them find all the content. And it also helps create a structure which helps Google understand what is relevant and what you are relevant to in your website. So you also need to keep in mind, it's kind of, you need to imagine that all the keywords that are linked in your site are like little neon signs. So if you had to see all of these links at once, what do you think Google would think your site is about? What would they think you do? So if you think that digital marketing would be it, then you're doing a good job. So it's important not to, give too much importance to things that are not the core of what you deal with, basically.
Well, that's really, really helpful. Something that I think a lot of people watching might be interested in, and if you are watching and you have questions, ask them in the comments, because that's kind of why we're here doing this live, in order that you can participate if you want to. So no matter where you're watching, your comments should be fed into our screen here, and we're happy to answer any questions you've got about any aspect of digital marketing. But since we have Stephanie here, blogging and SEO in particular, and obviously, Stephanie, your core area of focus is coaches, helping them build a business online. So if you're a coach watching, Stephanie is a treat. So ask your questions now. So I wanted to maybe move away from business owners and blogs, and maybe move towards the employee and the blog? And this asks me two questions. One question is, how can you leverage a team in your business to participate in that activity? But also maybe look at it from a career development perspective. If you are somebody who is an employee for somebody else, you've maybe never thought about having a blog. Why should they? How might that serve their career? I know you probably have a lot to talk about on that. So riff on that.
Yes, well, actually, strangely enough, it says very clearly on my website and in my blog that I'm a coach, but I actually get headhunted like every couple of weeks because of my blog. And it's one of those things, if you are employed or actually looking for employment, starting a blog is a fantastic way of getting noticed by people who are looking for someone just like you. I mean, imagine as an employer, you're sitting with, you're going to see 5 people and interview them back to back, and you're presenting with all these CVs. And then there is one person who actually has a blog, and you can see on their blog that they really into what you're going to employ them to do. Now, you're obviously going to be biased towards the person that has a blog because they have already proven their expertise. They're not going to sit there and just tell you that. You have proof. You can browse. You can see their excitement and their passion because they have a blog. So I think in terms of careers and recruitment, it's massive, really. It's a really, really big thing. I don't think it kind of adds a lot to you as an employee if you're having your own personal blog. But as employees that contribute to the company blog, I think that's a great thing if you have the right person. I've actually trained teams myself because I do a little bit of corporate work as well. I have trained teams, and I've had people in my programs who say, I'm an employee. I was not hired to do this. I am not in marketing, and I will never write. And then they change their mind. So I've actually seen the transformation myself, and I think anybody can write, and you can teach any employee actually to do it properly if they have, the right coaching and the right support. That said, you have to make sure that when you invest that kind of attention in your employee, of course, they're going to hang around. So you also have to pick the right employee. It's also important, I think, for employer branding, which is probably something I even have more experience with. I actually used to be a ghostwriter for a big CEO for about 5 years, maybe a bit longer than that, actually. And it's amazing the effect that it used to have. It was like an internal blog, but it was open, and it had as part of the strategy was to actually make sure that all the employees are really on board with the strategy of the company and they know what's happening, who's coming in, because sometimes a company goes into fast growing stage and you need to keep everybody in the loop. And then, also making sure that the CEO and the company get kind of enough recognition to grow the perception of the company. So there's actually a lot you can do with blogging once you know what you want to do. But you can only have one goal for one blog. You cannot have multiple because it becomes really hard then.
Are you talking about multiple goals per post or per blog, as in the body of work?
For the whole body of work. And now I've had clients who have tried because, they wanted to have the employer branding and also their B2B content within the same blog. And, some people like to throw in a bit of PR in there as well. And that is actually not a very good approach, because the structure of your blog and the categories of your blog are going to actually dictate what you rank for in the long term. So if you're going to have categories like PR and news and, employer branding, unless that's what you're actually selling, it's not a good idea. It's good to have a separate site where you have, maybe a careers subdomain, and you can put your blog on a career subdomain. That makes a lot more sense, but you cannot have them within the same blog Because that would become really confusing for Google and other search engines.
No, that makes perfect sense. It might not make sense to a lot of people, but it's actually quite simple. It's basically make sure that you clearly state what's on the cover and that what's inside logically follows that. And it's not that a business can't have two blogs. It's just it needs to create very clear silos for Google.
That's right. That's right.
So I got marginally excited there because something that really bugs me about lots of businesses is if I took two average businesses, I'm going to use an example here. I'll say telecoms companies. It's often very hard to distinguish what makes one different from another. And that's very, very frustrating for the consumer because they want sorry, there's a helicopter going over my house, quite low.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Don't know I'm on live.
What have you done? They're coming for you.
It's quite normal here. Funny story. Anyone that's listening, you'll enjoy this story too. It was the beginning of lockdown, and everything had stopped. Like the whole planet had stopped turning for about a week. All aircraft were grounded, and I heard a helicopter. And I have an app on my phone that tells me where aircraft are because I have the app that tells me that. Doesn't matter why. But that helicopter was the only aircraft in the sky over the whole of the UK at that point. It was really interesting. Anyway, that's my interesting story. Your face is frozen because I told a story. Oh, no, you're back.
Yes, I actually lost you for a bit, so.
Okay, it was just a rubbish story anyway. I was talking about, yes, two businesses, and you can't really see any difference between them. What's different are the values, are the people, are the stories, are the history, the reasons why they do what they do. But most businesses never express these things. And if you want people to hire you because of your business, because of the values, because of the stories, because of the things that make you different, you're going to have to tell these stories. And the blog is such an obvious place to do that in a way that will actually connect with the website visitor. So I love that idea. And I think that's a great reason to get employees involved because they can tell those stories. It needs to be done with a little bit of discipline. But in terms of winning business and generating leads, it's an obvious place to go. And it takes the website, the blog rather, away from being a chore to a clear driver of business. So yeah, I really like that.
Yes, and in fact, sometimes when we have small companies and they want to outsource their blogging, I would still recommend using the name of one of the employees, because especially the salespeople, because your audience gets familiar with them and they kind of feel like they're getting to know them, and it helps your salespeople close the sales. So usually, if we're done for you for a corporate company, for a B2B company, it's like the head of sales or the most active salesperson that would be the author of the blog, because that really helps. People are kind of feel like they already know him when they meet him.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, a lot of blogs, the author attribution is admin. And that sucks. That really does suck. Because people want to connect with the author of that content, if it's any good. So being there clearly attributable as an author, visible is, it's going to be a clear advantage because people connect with people, not with admin.
Indeed, and this is where small business has a big advantage.
So,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just thinking about my follow-up question.
Oh no, it's because my internet connection is a bit unstable, I think.
Don't worry.
It's 5:30 here, so everyone's just got home probably, and the internet goes a bit slower when that happens.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious to know, how often would you advise the average business owner to be posting on his blog? What's the sort of a minimum viable dose that's going to make a difference? It's actually going to be not just a chore, but it's going to be a chore, fair enough, but which delivers. Hopefully
Okay,
I'm not
now
making any promises.
most people don't like the answer to that question. It's not daily, don't worry. I wrote an article why you should blog daily once, and I was attacked by lots and lots of people for, of course, you don't have to blog every day. But just 2 posts per week is actually the benchmark. And you can actually find this information quite easily. All SEO people and people who deal with ranking blog posts and content people will agree that 2 posts per week. From my experience, I can tell you there is a very big difference in terms of the traction you get between posting 2 posts per week and posting 1 post per week. It can take you, 8 months to a year to get traction with 1 post per week. But with 2 posts per week, I've seen clients, get to the snippet of Google, which is position 0, better than position 1, in under 3 weeks. Of course, that can happen when the competition is not investing too much on SEO. It's usually slower than 3 weeks. 3 weeks is like really quick. But the 2 per week is definitely the benchmark to go for. Now, if you're a company and you're producing different kinds of content, you don't necessarily have to produce 2 blog posts. It just needs to be sort of 2 signals, 2 SEO signals a week. So it could be your podcast show notes and a blog post. It doesn't have to be necessarily, as long as you have two pages with substantial text, substantial being, 400 words plus, which actually is not substantial at all when you think about it, because you can write 400 words in 20 minutes.
I think if you are in the information business, as you and I are, that can be quite straightforward because this is just part of our discipline, part of our routine anyway. If I were running an engineering business, for example, where it's not part of what I would routinely do, and there's not going to be a short to medium term payoff, I'm simply not going to allow the time to be invested into that. So that knowing that it doesn't have to be earth-moving amounts of content, just a couple of times a week, is probably something I can delegate to my team.
That's right.
But knowing it's important, knowing that it can have an impact, that's, I think, the bit that the confidence gap is there. Nobody wants to be telling their team, I want a blog post from you once every 2 weeks, all of you. Nobody's going to do that if in 3 months' time nothing's changed. There's been no benefit. So I think you've done a great job of explaining that there will be a payoff if you're a little bit sort of intentional about the kind of content you create and the kind of attitude that you bring to that content, that it's going to be enjoyable to read. It's going to tell a clear, compelling story.
That's right. And it's going to move them to do what you want them to do.
Yeah.
That's important.
What are the biggest mistakes that you see most commonly being made, again, around the blog, around content in general? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing when you put your finger on the pulse of somebody's blog, you can usually see some problems. And I think anybody that hasn't been quite intentional about how they go about the blog or even their news section on their website will have fallen into a lot of bear traps, because a lot of these things are built by local web designers, not by people who really know how to rank through content.
That's right.
What are the normal bear traps you discover?
Well, the first thing that I practically find on the site of every client I actually work with is that they put all their content in one bucket. They don't categorize. So it's all sort of in your mydomain.com/blog post name. So it's all kind of in the top level.
Stop talking. Stop talking. I feel so guilty now. Carry on. I'm joking. I'm just thinking about my own blog and thinking, yeah.
Now, that is deceitful in the sense that it will work. So you will actually see an increase in traffic and your blog post will start ranking. But what tends to happen is that because they're all in the same place and all in the same group, once you have a certain amount of blog posts, usually anything between 50 plus, I would say, would really be too much in the same bucket. Then you're going to plateau because Google is going to say, okay, I already have enough information from this site about this particular topic. I don't need to have more. Whereas when you organize your blog into topics, then you have a much clearer structure. And of course, as your main site and as you start ranking the keywords that maybe were easier to rank for, then also the whole site starts getting more authority. And then because Google understands this very specific categories you rank for, they will know who to serve you to. So it kind of works against you when you put everything in one topic. I actually worked with a client once who had a lot of those, and they had, sometimes it's quite a problem when you have someone who is either reselling a product or even a service sometimes, because they will have duplicate descriptions, where you have a description that's on their site and also on other resellers' site. And then you have a lot of content about the same topics. And it becomes really vague to Google as to which searches to best serve you to. So that doesn't work in your advantage at all. So ideally, like you mentioned before, as siloed as possible, go as deep as possible in each category. So, if you maybe operate, if you serve maybe 3 or 4 niches, let's say, you're a digital marketer and you work with importers, you work with doctors, you work with service providers, you work with consultants. Those you should have content for each of those, because that's going to make it really clear who to serve your content to for search engines.
A lot to think about there.
Yes, it is also a lot of work for most people. So that's another thing. When you have a lot of content already, it can be hard to actually audit and move everything.
And when you move it, I guess anybody that has a blog on their website, it doesn't really matter what industry they're in, it's 8 times out of 10, it's going to be WordPress that powers that.
Yes.
And if it's not, you have a different problem.
Yes.
And
So true.
you can quite easily add categories into blog posts on WordPress. And you can quite easily add, again, this is getting nerdy, the category slug component into the URL.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to do that on a website where the blog is maybe 3 or 4 years old, is that going to cause a search engine marketing problem? Or is Google going to very quickly adapt to that?
Okay, now that's an interesting question. That's something actually I do with some of my clients. Sometimes I have clients who have been, coaches for a while, and they're going to the next level, maybe adding new services, and they're like, hey, I've got 5 years of blogging. So how do I reorganize and make sure I don't lose my ranking, but also sort of reposition and give more visibility to the new content based on my new products? So what I would do in that kind of situation is you need to go in and actually export the list of all your pages. So you need to look at your Google Search Console, see what ranks. You need to look at everything on your site, any statistics you have to find out which of your blog posts are actually generating traffic. And what you want to do then is you want to make sure that at least the ones that are generating traffic are redirected. So you direct from the old domain to the new one. The ones that are not really ranking, it's not worth all the work. But if you can find a short list of the ones that are actually driving traffic and redirect those, then you should be okay. You will have a temporary dip. There will be a temporary dip, but you will catch on very quickly then.
So being very, very practical then, and again, I make mistakes too, everyone. It's fine.
We all do.
on my website, my podcasts, they're all categorized within my blog as podcast, and that's fine. However, when you see the URL structure, it's just the domain / the podcast title. I'm not displaying the category slug. Is that a problem, or would there be a benefit to doing that?
Okay, well, it would be better to show the category, but also I would remove the podcast name because you don't need that really. Because your podcast name is probably going to be pretty visible in all the pages anyway, and Google knows it's a podcast, right?
So, and we're talking about the sort of dynamically generated WordPress, and I can remove the page title from that.
Not the page title, the podcast title. So you would add the page title and the category title. You don't necessarily need the podcast title, I would imagine. Okay. Unless, because you're going to see that it is in mine. It's actually not my podcast name, but it's actually one of the top keywords for podcasts in my genre that people search for. So
I'll have to have a look at that. Thanks for everyone that's watching. Yeah. Bearing with me there where I get some technical support. So with coaches in particular, then you work with a lot of coaches.
Yes.
Which disciplines or which areas of coaching do you find it hardest to help rank? Is there a particular, it's an odd question, I know, but some people I can imagine is very low competition. It's quite easy to rank. And others, it really just must be a nightmare. And how do you keep people motivated through that? Okay.
Well, I'm going to be completely honest. There is no such thing as a coach that is difficult to rank because coaches are not usually great at SEO. So there's actually very few people you're competing with. And, the thing about coaches is that it's actually quite easy to rank. What they find most difficult is to actually know what to write about. Because actually, probably in the region of 60% of my clients, maybe even more, maybe even 70%, are actually people who are in the wellness industry. So they are therapists. They're therapists, they deal with wellness, they deal with health. So the benefits they offer usually overlap, but the way they bring you to the result is different. So they are all unique, which makes competition quite irrelevant, really, once you really nail the niche, and they can rank pretty quickly. I think that problem probably exists when you have someone who is being very generic with the way they name themselves and with the topics. So for instance, there are business coaches out there that are quite generic. But the problem again is not the SEO. The problem is the fact that it's not niche enough to actually work. And I think the problem then exists across the whole marketing, not just across your SEO. So in fact, I usually take people 2 or 3 steps back and we go back to the ideal client and make sure that they are focusing in on, their own expertise as well as the kind of clients they're trying to attract. And often it means also maybe tweaking some packages or renaming stuff. It's just putting a different wrapping, a niche wrapping on everything that you do. But it really helps. It makes ranking so much easier. The only category I know that's difficult to rank for is actually blog coaching because we're all content specialists. And it's quite funny because only a couple of weeks ago, I was on top of Jeff Goins and I was quite proud of that. But 2 weeks later, I've actually focused on some other keywords that are driving traffic to my strategy sessions right now. So I actually went down something like 19 positions in a couple of weeks. That is a competitive industry. But of course, it's because it's a good sign. It means the people in the industry know what they're talking about because they're doing what they preach. So it's actually interesting and exciting at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine. So something you mentioned a moment ago was, see if I can remember it. I'll be trying to remember it while you were talking.
Oh,
Naming, generic naming. That a lot of businesses, I see some businesses where they have, I guess my question is, that's what I wanted to ask about. When you define generic naming, how are you defining that? Is it in terms of the domain name, or how are you defining generic naming?
So generic naming, was that when I was talking about the categories?
No, that was more in terms of the business names.
Oh, the business names. Okay, so one thing that I come across, which is really, really common, is transformation coach. But of course, what transformation is it? And, another interesting one is the fact that the benefits are usually quite similar as well. So, they're dealing with people who are in corporate, got burnt out or almost did, were unhappy with their relationships, and now they're building a different life through. Now, there's different tools. There's mindfulness, there's yoga, there's RTT, there's so many different things they can do. It goes into astrology and all these alternative things. So in reality, it's about nailing down what you do and how you get them there, but then obviously connecting it to the outcome. And it usually comes with looking inward a little bit. And so, for instance, let's say if you're a transformational coach and you do that by hypnotizing people, by taking them, through a series of meditations and light hypnotism. There can be a lot of different things. Then you need to make sure that the way you do it, the way you talk about yourself and the transformation you bring is very defined. And that sometimes can mean that you have to leave out some of the people you work with. Like, for instance, if you work with teenagers and also women who have been in traumatic relationships, then you cannot say that all at once because it's quite a mouthful. It's like, as you probably realize from this conversation, I work with corporate people. I have, I work with coaches. I work with consultants. There's quite an array. I actually work quite a lot with SaaS companies as well. But you're not going to hear me say that because that would be too much for people and it would not work on search engines either. So you have to be very specific on the one thing. It's like you said before, we open up quite a lot, as in, of course, blogging involves also getting that call to action to work. So it's also conversion in a way. And of course, there's also content that is not just for search engines. There's content that we use for launches. So in its own way, content marketing is vast, but I have to pick what I want to market. And one of the questions I get is that I find that people ask me, so what do I do if somebody comes and they're not within my target audience? And I'm like, when you niche in terms of marketing, it doesn't mean you have to say no to people. If somebody comes to you because they see your value and they want to work with you, that's perfectly fine. But of course you cannot market to all these people at once. So people who want to keep one or two target audiences, usually I say, okay, so find two different ways of marketing to these people. Let's say, for instance, if you're going to market to coaches, for instance, in my case, my blog is specifically going deeper and deeper into the coach marketing because those are the kind of clients I work with online. I also have other clients that come from different industries through referrals and maybe through other forms of marketing, but you cannot mix the two because then it becomes really confusing. So it's more of a marketing decision than a business decision kind of thing.
What you're essentially talking about is taking your avatar very, very seriously. It's being
Yes.
very clear on who this website is for specifically,
Exactly.
and not hedging your bets, not casting a wide net, but it's really going deep on this one personality that you want this website to be for, not just the blog, but the whole website essentially. And I guess you pick up everything else, as you described, through the online halo effect of referrals and other ways people can discover you. But if you design your website around that one person that would be your absolute A-list, then you're far more likely to get that one person.
That's right. And coming back, for instance, to the printer example you said before, they have B2B and B2C. So they could decide to, for instance, target their B2C clients, which are the ones that we mentioned had the 10-year anniversary, and focus their blog completely on them and their marketing online completely on that. But then they could focus their B2B, for instance, on targeting a certain type of agency. Of course, agencies that maybe have blue chip clients, or the kind of clients they want to target. But they could do that in a different way. They don't need to do that in their online marketing. They can do that with maybe trying to have a landing page and drive some traffic to it, or by simply going to a conference and having stands where these people are. So you can just find a different way that is separate to your website to do that. It doesn't mean you completely have to drop it. You just have to be really disciplined about taking your marketing decisions. And it's hard. It's so hard. Even for me, it's like, it's hard for everyone.
Well, I found that really, really useful. I think I'm going to have to review how I use my blog. And I hope anybody watching, if you don't have a blog on your website, if you do take it seriously, if you do invest in it over time, it will pay back to you. But I think it's like a lot of things. If you're not serious about it, don't expect it to do anything for you. And if you're blaming your website for your lack of business success, then maybe looking at your commitment to your content is probably a good place to look, rather than blaming the website.
Absolutely.
Stephanie, if people want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
Right, so they can find me on stephaniefiteni.com. So if you Google Stephanie Fiteni, you can find me there. The handle is Stephanie Fiteni on Facebook, or you can find me as Steph Fiteni on Instagram. But again, I am actually most active on my website. And sometimes it's quite funny because people tell me, you don't have a very big social media following. And I'm like, I don't really have the incentive to build a large social media following because, it's like my ecosystem. I use SEO mostly, and that kind of feeds itself. So it's one of those things. But you will see me active on social media, and it's a great way to actually follow the blogs for those of you who prefer to use social media. So.
Well, Stephanie, I have had fun, but my stomach is starting to grumble.
Oh, yes, it's getting late.
Must be dinner time. Have you eaten yet?
No, but we're quite late eaters.
Oh,
so yes. I actually have another podcast interview after this. So, and then I'll call it a day.
Who are you on with?
Sorry?
Who are you speaking to this afternoon? After me?
Oh, I'm speaking to Saji Schreiber.
Oh. Israel.
Someone you know. Yes.
I do. My mate Sagi.
Oh,
Tell him
Sagi.
I said hi.
I will.
This is Jonathan Gutierrez commenting on YouTube. Elbow cough. Very clever, Jonathan. Stephanie, thank you very much for your time. I've had great fun. Thank you to anyone that's been watching.
Thank you very much for having me.
Always my pleasure. You're welcome back anytime. If you enjoyed listening to this, my podcast is much more structured and well organized and disciplined. The Digital Marketing Chat Live is its chaotic cousin. So thank you for bearing with me. Stephanie, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Say hi to Sagi, and bye-bye.
And you. Bye-bye.